Okay.
And she stepped on the ball.
I was wondering if you're going to fail me today or not. Haven't you used that one before?
I have. It's one of my.
Damn it.
Anybody watching knows what it's from, and there are two answers.
Trading Places.
And
that's it. That's all.
Oh, see,
like
reference to an older movie.
Oh, see, I can remember Dan Aykroyd and Eddie Murphy. I can't go much beyond that. I'm a little too young.
And the situation is almost identical.
Something's up with your microphone, Mr. Rollick. So.
Oh dear.
That's better.
Did it just squeak?
Yeah.
That was my dog barking.
Oh, maybe. Well, anyway.
Do you have a sarcophagus in your room now?
I've always had a sarcophagus in my room.
I thought we were all supposed to bring one. I'm sorry.
All right. Welcome to the Lovecraftian podcast. This is February the 17th, 2019. Hey, we've got an actual prize today, which we haven't done in a while. And it is an Arkham Bazaar. I think it's a 4-set pen. If you go to the Lovecraftian page, not the group, I just posted about it with a photo, and this is from Arkham Bazaar, the folks behind the H.P. Lovecraft Film Festival the past few years. So Gwen and Brian Callahan, and they wanted to give a couple of these away, and you know what? They're worth winning because they are they go for like $80 or something.
They're also freaking awesome.
Yeah. Yeah. So anyway, I'm Mike Davis, as you can tell by this identification here. Mulder, Fox Mulder. My son gave me that from Loot Crate. We've got Soren Narnia here today from the Knifepoint Horror podcast. Hey, Soren, how's it going?
What's up?
Hey. Well, that microphone thing is you, Rick. So, getting a little feedback there. Okay, so let's do introductions. Rick, while you're not muted, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself?
Rick Lay, writer.
All right, and Pete?
Pete Rollick, collector of lapel pins for many, many years. Here, I'll bring them closer.
Is this your way of saying you want to win the prize?
No, I would not ever suggest that.
Matt.
Hi, I'm Matt Carpenter. Currently, I am sponsoring movie night, at least for now.
Yeah, I appreciate that.
Go on the eZine Facebook page and vote for this week's movie.
Facebook group, Lovecraft. If you get on Facebook and type in Lovecraft eZine message board, then you can request to join. And you're doing it same time I was doing it, right? 9 p.m. Central.
Yes, that works out for most everybody.
Every Saturday night. So
we even have a woman viewing from Japan, and it's about 1 PM there when she watches.
Oh, that's great. Yeah. So you do that using we've been doing that using Rabbit, so which is pretty easy to use. Ben.
Ben Handelman, reader, and also a fan of Matt Carpenter's movie night. We watched Bone Tomahawk yesterday. It was pretty great.
Oh, was it?
Enjoyed it very much. Kurt Russell really sells the movie, but I'd say any fan of horror would probably enjoy the movie.
I always found that to be just a really, really good Western remake of The 13th Warrior, but
which is a good movie. I love The 13th Warrior. All right, it's been brought to my attention through the Whisper Network, rumors, innuendo, that this podcast is not always, what do we want to say, pitch perfect with the production values. I have only one defense to this. No, it's not. So this is a live show. So if you're listening to this later in your car, maybe write the guys at YouTube and tell them there's a problem or something. But I think for the most part, we're fine. And I think the new slogan for this show will be never perfect, always fun. So I'm going to start incorporating that into, well, I think it works, Pete. Pete's giving me the fisheye. All right. We've been missing. You don't agree?
No, I was just thinking never perfect, but who is? And if quit complaining and start your own podcast, damn it.
Yeah, we are missing a couple of panelists lately. One will be returning next week, and I don't want to give anything away, but
he's a drunk.
Yes, and his name rhymes with Jelly Sung. So he told me he's going to be back next week. So, all right. So, Soren, hey, thanks for coming on again. We've had you on about, man, year and a half ago, 2 years ago, something like that.
Yeah.
So it's been a while. Yeah. So thanks for coming back.
I've not aged well, but
no, you look the same to me. Unless you're using an avatar.
I don't have that kind of skill.
Really good makeup. As everyone who listens or watches this show knows, I'm a big fan of audio drama, audio books, done well. Soren certainly does do them well. They're really great stories, and they're really read well by him. And I think if you had one without the other, you would not have a success. But he does both really, really well. They're really intimate. There's no, speaking of production values, there's no big bells and whistles when you listen to Knifepoint Horror. A lot of the time you just hear Soren talking. Usually start off with, "My name is Mike Davis," and or whoever the protagonist name is, and hey, this is what happened to me. And it's one of my favorite podcasts out there. So Hyman Brown is a guy who died in 2010, lived to be almost 100 years old, and he I think produced a lot of golden age of radio theater. And then in the 70s, he did mystery theater. And he did an episode almost every freaking night, an hour episode, 45 minutes, without commercials, for about 8 years. Some of them were campy, some of them were great, some of them were not great, but he's to be commended on the speed. I can't imagine how much work it took to do an episode a night. But my point is this: when he did an interview with the New York Times, and he said, "I am firmly convinced that nothing visual can touch audio. I don't need 200 orchestra players doing the Ride of the Valkyries. I don't need car chases. I don't need mayhem. All I need to do is creak the door open, and visually your head begins to go. The magic word is imagination." And I either heard or read an interview with you, Soren, not too far back, where you, I think, said something along the same lines, where you were far more fascinated with audio than with the associated video. Can you start with that and talk about that?
Yeah, it's true that our imaginations are filling things in at a freakish speed in every second when we're experiencing something. And I think in that lies pretty immense power if you can somehow do something that gets people's imaginations going. And even in a great horror movie with you got the visuals, you got the music, even in the great ones, the most powerful moments for me are the ones where a lot of it goes away, and you're left to just fill in the gaps. And it's just a freaky thing of the imagination that was true 5,000 years ago, and I think it'll be true 5,000 years from now. As sophisticated as movies get, as sophisticated as everything gets, there's this baseline of greatness and the imagination that just needs to go to work. You just need to tap it and let people do a lot of the thinking for themselves. I think it just always works. It's just great. That's my most vivid memories of horror radio dramas and novels and movies. It's always the quietest moments where I was being shown the least. I think that's what I try to be about myself.
Yeah, I was going to ask what to give me some examples of your influences. What led you down this path?
Well, I was always I remember watching movies as a kid, and my favorite example remains, say, the USS Indianapolis scene of Jaws. Robert Shaw is telling that story. Jaws is this big budget, blockbuster movie, and to me, what's the most powerful, amazing moment that I go back to most often is when everything stops and he tells the story. And I'm always looking for that in things. And when I was growing up, my influences, I didn't get into horror movies for quite a while. It was always just reading, and I didn't really know that there was this whole world of spooky movies out there. And I remember vividly when I was growing up, I remember my father used to take me to Baltimore Orioles games. I remember lying in the back seat after the games ended at night because it was past my bedtime, and then he would have the post-game show on. I remember that staticky voice kind of telling the details of what happened in the game, and lying there in the back seat staring at just this black car ceiling. And that was so vivid to me and powerful, just that one voice speaking, because my imagination was filling in everything. And just little influences like that, more so than any other technique, really took hold for me. So I've always been fascinated by what you can accomplish with just a voice, or just a few words on the page in a dark room with a candle. Those are all my influences. So I reading the Victorian ghost stories from the library growing up, stories before there was any technology, anything digital going on, anything fancy. I think reading those as a kid was a good start for me before I got into everything else. The first horror stories I ever read were from 1849 or something like that. That was a good way for the seed to take hold.
You consider both of those on the same level as far as, what do I want to say, dramatic effect? And what I mean by that is reading a story or a book as opposed to listening to one read to you effectively.
I personally don't do so well when something is read to me. My attention span is non-existent. So listening to the single voice, I like the mood and the effect, but the details start to swim in my brain. So radio dramas, radio plays has more of a hook for me. And of course, you bring in the visuals and I have no problem paying attention. So it's weird. I can do it. I can write something and read it, and I think I'm having an effect. But when it's reversed, I'm actually not a big listener of single voice story presentations. I don't listen to a lot of audiobooks. At night when I drift off to sleep, I will, but that's because my attention, I'm not really paying attention. It's more about the creating the atmosphere in the room as I drift off.
What kind of stuff are you listening to when you drift off to sleep?
YouTube, of course, is this fantastic resource of readings of all the classic ghost stories, horror stories.
Right.
And these files are 6 hours long.
Right.
So some of the Lovecraft stuff, which I never actually sat down and read all the way through, or some of the August Derleth stuff, the second tier, so to speak. I like to catch up with those in that way. So I've been listening to, say, The Whisperer in Darkness for about 3 months, because I keep starting it at the beginning and I drift off to sleep. And I'm fairly familiar with the first 20 minutes of the 3-hour file. So yeah,
there's a really, really good reading of The Festival on YouTube that you should check out sometime. Really well done. The Festival by Lovecraft.
Your recommendation, the Bronson Pinchot reading of I forget what story it was, but I stumbled across that on YouTube. He did a terrific job with one of the Lovecraft stories. It's just that's YouTube just keeps dredging these things up. God bless.
Yeah. What do you? Well, speaking of YouTube, what do you think about creepypasta? You ever listen to that at all?
I do not. I've read a few online, and that format is just great. I mean, that to me is the ultimate. And that's how it should be. I love that stuff. I like the campfire method, that complete minimalism, where a story is this long and that's all you're going to get. We're not going to try bringing subplots. It's just so impactful, and that to me that's the core and the ideal of what I kind of wanted to do in the beginning with the Knifepoint Horror podcast, but I'm just too verbose and bloated. I get really excited and interested in creating more arcs, more storylines within, weaving things together, and at the end you have kind of something that was not my original intent. I always wanted to be the dude who has like these 8-minute stories that feel very much like real life. I strayed, Mike.
You're addicted. No, I think hey, look, you have a hell of a lot of fans, so you're evidently doing something that appeals to a lot of people. So if you strayed in the right direction.
I just listened to the most recent one, and I would argue 75 minutes suited a lot better than 8 minutes would have. So I appreciate the verbose nature of it. It was actually quite enjoyable to listen to.
Oh yeah, thank you. That one was a giant pain in the butt to get right. I've never been more in disarray with a story than that last one. It was whew.
Yeah. But I do remember you telling me last time on the show, I told you about the time that my wife and I were driving late at night in the dark on a 2-lane, and this kind of 2-dimensional shadow ran in front of us.
Yeah.
And I've told this story several times on the show, but you said something to the effect of, just in 30, 60 seconds there's a really good, weird, effective story.
Right. And that doesn't need to be any longer. Yeah, I think that is the horror ideal. Of course, if you can come up with something that's 2.5 hours that's riveting every step of the way, that's great too. But to me, it never quite gets as just scary in terms of just scary. Getting that creep up your spine. It never gets any better than 3-4 minutes of story like that.
Or some of those 2-line creepypasta stories.
Yeah, I don't know if someone's put a book out of the shortest possible horror stories.
Yeah.
But I think I'd be interested in reading that.
Yeah, they're good. Have you read any of them all on the internet? The 2 lines?
The real short one? No, I haven't. I didn't know that there were like these super condensed.
Yeah. Pete?
I think the one I remember best is the one I think Ramsey Campbell's daughter wrote. And it's When I'm Dead, I'll Be Hungry.
There you go.
Yeah, I'm done. Yeah.
The one I remember best is little girl calls her dad into her dark bedroom at night and says, "Daddy, I'm scared. There's I think there's something under the bed. And he goes, no. But, I'll look and to make you feel better. And he looks under the bed and he sees his daughter. And his daughter's lying under the bed saying, Daddy, I think there's something on top of my bed.
You know what? Somebody needs to take all of these and print them one by one on T-shirts.
Yeah.
There's a company that will reproduce an entire novel on a T-shirt in incredibly thin print. Someone needs to do this. These incredibly short creepypastas. Walking around with one right there.
Walk around the mall and creep people out. Yeah.
Yeah.
So at some point, you said to yourself, basically, okay, I enjoy doing this. I like this idea of being around a campfire, telling stories, and hey, at least in this age, a digital campfire, so to speak, telling stories. I want to do this, and you started up the Knifepoint Horror podcast. Is that basically what happened? And did you have some stories ready to go, or how exactly did that work for you?
I had about 10 or 12 ready to go, and I just discovered the podcasting format. I thought, oh, this is cool.
Yeah.
And
on a radio station, basically.
Yeah. I had been like most people, kind of thinking like, how, do I really feel like writing query letters endlessly over and over again? I just found that incredibly depressing and frustrating. So I thought, well, maybe I'll just do this directly, play with this new fun little technology. And so I did the first 8 or 10 or 12. And then I stopped because I was done. I didn't have anything else. And the podcast was over. But I noticed that as the months went on, more and more people were downloading the stories for some reason. So I thought, oh, okay, this maybe means that there's something more here than I thought. So let me keep trying a few more, and then a few more, and then a few more. So that's basically how it came together. It was almost more of, what is this podcasting thing? Can I use this to cheat and shortcut my way to an audience?
Yes, you can.
Recommended as just that kind of tool. Yeah.
Well, you've said, I think to me and others, that it was depressing to you to think about writing all these query letters. I haven't looked at a Writer's Digest or a Writer's Magazine in a long time, but when I did, it wasn't ever really about writing. There wasn't much about writing in there. It was all about how to get your stuff published. Which I found depressing too. A
lot of writers groups I've noticed, the focus is very often on writing for publishing, writing for joy or impact.
As I just want to say, as someone who is back in school currently, I've noticed a lot of people that are taking writing classes seem to think that they're already the next Stephen King or J.K. Rowling, so they don't need the help on how to actually write. They think they just need help getting published. So I think that may be why that phenomenon is like that. Everyone already thinks their writing's perfect. So I've seen that in class numerous times now.
Yeah, I wanted to ask at some point, I like to say to people, if you were teaching a horror fiction writing class, and you wanted to open with the first class with a key sentence, you wanted to, okay, here's what I want you to think about above all things, class. What would that be if you had that opportunity to kind of take a class of 20 people and say, okay, here is my core lesson about writing horror that I wish to express. What would the lesson be in one or two sentences? I like to play that imagination game with people and see what their response is.
We got like a 2-sentence. We had F. Paul Wilson on recently, and near the end, I asked him that question. About that dreaded writing advice question, especially from a successful guy like Paul is, and he gave like a 2-sentence. He basically said, "Here's two bullet points," and it was just that simple. So yeah.
Did you write them down? What are they? I need them.
Now you're putting me on the spot because I haven't thought about them in about 5 weeks. But I'll get back to you on that. Well, no, one of them was to remember always that writing is rewriting. You know, the first draft is usually terrible, and so is the third and the fourth. And, you know, you have to keep working on it and tinkering with it and working on it. So I think that's, you know, he said you've got to get that first draft down. Otherwise, there's nothing to fix. You know, even if you're writing and you think, oh, God, that's complete garbage. Well, okay, maybe it is garbage, but it's garbage you can tinker with. And, you know, one writing book that I read, it kind of described it as you're writing and it's blah, 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 gold, blah, 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 gold, you know, so, you know, you go back and you mine the gold out and eliminate all the dross. So, you've also said that it depressed you to think about attempting to make a living writing or getting, yeah, I guess put it that way. Can you talk about that a bit? It's an interesting take on things, and I'm certainly not advocating, and I wouldn't think that you are either, that there's any right or wrong way to get your work in front of people. And certainly, if somebody wants to hand me $1 million for doing this podcast or anything I'm doing, or I would imagine hand you $1 million for doing Knifepoint Horror, we wouldn't say no. But having said that, can you talk about your feelings on that?
Yeah, I should say that I have one of the lowest thresholds for selling out of any human being. I mean, I will do anything for, you know, $100. But that being said,
let's test that theory.
Whoa.
Because we can pool some money together here.
Yeah. Hell, I got $100 right here.
I do remember, you know, when I was a kid, you know, the joy of, before you realize that even people would actually read this sort of thing, writing the stories, you know, on summer vacation, 12 years old, and when I first became aware of such things as the writer, I remember opening the writer's market when I was a teenager, and just the process seemed like kind of depressing. And I think what it comes down to is I hate work more than most people. Anything that begins to feel like work starts to bum me out. And when I became aware that there was such a thing as professional writers who wrote for a living, and if you did X, Y, and Z, you could actually do that.
Maybe.
Yeah, maybe, exactly, maybe. But even before I realized the odds were so incredibly low of actually making that happen, it robbed it of the joy for me. I didn't, suddenly it became work overnight. And I've never gotten into the mindset of equating writing these stories with producing money. I mean, sometimes it does sort of by accident almost, but there's like a disconnect there. To me, the two things really have nothing to do with each other in my mind.
Yeah, I'm thinking of Charles Bukowski. I mean, he didn't exactly go after, I mean, it was a complete accident. Right. Guy's a drunk and he's writing all this stuff, poetry, right. and just by chance, this small press writer discovers him and it goes from there.
Right.
You know,
right.
But he certainly didn't seek it and didn't really care once he had it.
Right. That's good. I think that is a good attitude, because it does start to taint things in tiny little ways. I've found myself sometimes maybe cutting off the work on a story maybe a little bit sooner than I normally would, because I know that there are people who are waiting for this, who are sort of invested in it. And I think that's, you know, you have to keep an eye on yourself, a very close eye on yourself when money is involved. And I don't really like to do that. I like to sort of swim in this fish tank of the imagination swimming around all day, happy as can be, not knowing that there's an outside world beyond the fish tank. I don't like that. I like to be in the fish tank. So when money starts to enter into considerations, it just feels like that's what I was not put on earth to want.
Right, and if that's the path for some other people, hey, you know what? That's great. We're not judging, but I think in order to be that way, you not only have to have that attitude that you're talking about money, but also about fame. Because I've said this before, that I do think a lot of writers get into it because I want to be Stephen King. I want everybody to know who I am and blah, blah, blah. There are many, many writers who don't. There are many writers who get into it for the joy of it. And they're not built like you or I. They don't mind all the query letters and stuff like that. So they're fine with it. But, the way you do it, you have far more control. Absolute control.
I think that's what I want more than anything else, is just control. If I do a good story, a bad story, at least it's mine. And that there's a satisfaction to that when something is yours, like you did it. If you build a birdhouse and it's wonky, but you spent the whole weekend building this birdhouse, it just feels so much better than if you bought something terrific, a very nice one from Home Depot. So that I think that is what I'm after. Very much.
Raleigh, were you shaking your head at me? Do you disagree with me?
No, not at all.
You can. I won't kick you off the show.
No, I constantly agree with you. There is nothing. As one of my many publishers who actually pays me money, there is nothing I won't do to agree with you.
Well, I gotta say, Pete, it's just bloody obvious that you write for the love of it, because you're just writing all the time.
Well,
I mean, you answer calls from publishers.
Yeah.
But I don't want to speak for you.
No. And you're right. There are people who I work with who pay me a lot of money, and then there are people who I work with who pay me almost nothing, or I just give them.
That would be me. Yeah, but go ahead.
Yeah. But it has nothing to do. I enjoy writing. And if you can intrigue me with a premise and I like it, I'll write it for it, and I'll live with whatever the pay rate is. I'll also, if there's a friend in need or a cause that needs a story, I'll donate a story.
Yeah, you do. Oh shoot, we lost Soren.
Oh,
He'll
no.
be back. Yeah.
Buy your love won't pay my bills. What?
Just ignore him.
Yeah, but yeah.
I was the one drinking. What's going on here?
Yeah, Matt's like, drunk.
Now he's gone.
Yeah.
Matt's gone. Soren's gone.
I think like the Midwest got kicked off.
Yeah, well, continue your thought, and I will resend the link to Soren.
Well, the other thing that I do is that, like, for example, I got approached by one of the people a week and a half ago. I was at a con, and I saw somebody there who published some of my first stories, and he's like, I haven't published an issue in a long time, and I'm thinking about doing it. And I'm like, don't even ask. Yes, of course. You gave me a break when nobody else would. So yeah, of course I'm going to support you for almost the rest of my life. As long as as long as you're not tanking as an individual, as long as you're not, secretly, a Nazi.
I was about to say a Nazi. Yeah, because you're known with the company you keep.
Exactly.
Their reputation rubs off on you.
Yeah.
But I was going to say before Soren went off, and hopefully he comes back on. Maybe he's having computer problems. But I don't know what Matt is doing this show. And if you're listening to this later in your car, you probably just think we're nuts. But anyway, I was going to say, Pete, it probably doesn't hurt. The feeling I get from you is that you like your day job. So you have this source of money from a place that you don't. I mean, my feeling is, correct me if I'm wrong, that you don't wake up in the morning and go, oh, God, I need to shoot myself in the head before I go into work today.
I wake up Thursdays and Sundays and check my lottery tickets.
But you're a scientist.
Yes, I know. And I enjoy my job. However, I have worked for the same company now. It'll be 28 years on March 1st.
Wow.
And I've got 2 years till 30, which is, and then, 30 is retirement. And then I can do a 5-year for a bonus payout. So I got.
But you're doing that, aren't you?
Yeah, of course I'm going to do that. So, yeah. Yes.
And everybody's built different, I can't do it. I can't hold down a day job. I couldn't do it before I got sick. I had to work for myself,
The day after I signed my retirement papers for the 5-year drop, I'm going to shave the sides of my head and dye my mohawk purple.
Great. Somebody note that. Somebody write that down.
Something like that. I'm going to do something. They can't fire me at that point. Well, they can, but it's really, really tough.
But your wife has no say in this. She'll be completely happy with the purple mohawk look. It's fine.
There are worse things I could do.
Yeah, like quit before the payout.
Can you bring her in here to confirm this? Because I have my doubts here personally. As a married man, I don't know.
Yeah, I can't because she's mediating between the children, the dog, and the cat.
Are you going to get a motorcycle?
I am not going to get a motorcycle.
Okay.
What about the Porsche?
I have been through my midlife crisis. That is my current wife. So no, I'm not getting a Porsche.
All right. So I know we've got a lot of Soren fans out there, Soren Narnia fans out there. I do have a lot more questions for him. I'm sure you guys do too. I don't know if his internet went out or what. I'm keeping an eye on my email. Sometimes these things happen. And if it does happen, I'll get him back on the next week or two. And so let's jump to our usual hour 2 stuff, things to talk about, and hopefully he'll pop back in.
Okay.
You notice how smoothly I did that? I mean, talk about, yes, Matt.
Okay. I wanted to mention something. It's like.
There he is. You can stop talking now.
Wow, that was amazing.
No, Matt, you can say what you were going to say.
Okay, it's like you look at everybody's room and they've got all this geek stuff. I just went to the showing of They Will Not Grow Old by Peter Jackson.
Are you going to show us your tattoo now?
No, but the thing is they
Man, he's got a lot of
25-minute documentary after the movie about how they made the movie. And it's like, we can't even compete. It's like he was saying, so we needed to know the color of the uniforms. So I went to my collection of World War I uniforms, and I had one from several different regiments, and we could pull them out and compare the stripes. And then he said, then we needed to record the proper sounds of the artillery while it was being loaded and towed around. So we had to go to my collection of artillery pieces and pull out the relevant ones. And I'm thinking to myself, I'm not worthy. Whatever I've got in my room, it's trivial compared to whatever Peter Jackson has in his warehouses. And
in his regular house. I don't know if you've seen the photos. Anyway, back to Soren. Hey, Soren. Glad to see you're back.
Yeah, it was pretty spooky there for a while. My entire computer seemed to just catch flame, which is rare.
It happens.
Wait, your computer caught fire?
Oh, yeah.
A lot of people have actually caught on fire on this show. So, so some guests have backed out because of that. Okay, we were just talking about when you accidentally dropped out about, bypassing the gatekeepers, having complete control of your own art. I want to segue into that to Creative Commons. Not everybody out there, probably most, but not everybody out there knows what Creative Commons is. So if you could first explain that, and then secondly, why you went with a Creative Commons license with your podcast.
Yeah, so Creative Commons, you see the pop up a lot. I guess it was designed as a way, because content exploding all over the internet, it's a way to sort of stamp each work with individual, whatever license you wish to apply to it. So you can say to people, look, I'm putting this out there. If you want to reuse it with attribution, go ahead. Or maybe a different license says, look, you can use this only in certain circumstances. So there's various Creative Commons licenses. So what I thought I would do is put the most liberal one I really felt comfortable with on everything I post on the show. And in that way, what I hoped was that people would take these stories and do their own adaptations of them so I could watch them or listen to them. Because when I was young, how I learned to write, how I kind of taught myself to write, was watching scenes from a movie and sort of turning that into prose. Or I would like to do, I wrote little radio dramas based on short stories I'd read. One of the first things I ever did, I took, my favorite Lovecraft story at the time was The Shadow Out of Time. I chopped that down to 30 or 40 pages just for my own fun, and I did a reading of it. And I just loved to do that as a kid. I thought, why let other people do that with things that I write, so I can see like their take on it. So that was the idea there.
I noticed that one guy was going to do, or maybe did do, a short film or film adapted from your story, The Staircase. He had a fundraiser on that. Did that ever come to fruition? Do you know?
I don't know if that one did, but several other people have sort of tried, in particular, that story. Somebody else did one that they finished that they're kind of putting around in film festivals, and then another guy I've been corresponding with has been working for months on his own adaptation. He's almost finished. So something about that story, it's cheap to do. So that one is usually in production somewhere by somebody.
It would be interesting.
I like the idea that people, like, someone's going to send me a link. I'm like, okay, I adapted your story. I will just be entertained as a spectator watching that. I think it's great.
I got to say, I love your attitude about all of this. I really do. I was talking to Pete while you temporarily dropped out, and I said that it probably also doesn't hurt to not hate your day job or like your day job. I don't know how much you want to get into. Soren Narnia is probably, obviously, not your real name. I know what your real name is, and for a small monthly fee, I will not reveal it.
That's right. I won't tell people your real name either.
Damn it. Actually, I like my real name. It's really hard to Google Mike Davis and come up with anything that it's like John Smith.
Does that ever bother you, by the way, having a name like Mike Davis, that it's everyone else has stolen it?
No, I figure it must be good. Everybody's got it,
Were you a C.S. Lewis fan? Is that where Narnia comes from?
No, that's interesting. Tell them the story of where Soren Narnia comes from. Because I read it on your other.
Right. So when I was, I think it was like third grade. Back then, all the slow learners and so forth, they're all put in one class together. So they sat me next to a kid named Christopher, who was I think he was mentally challenged, and I don't know what the thinking was there. That maybe I would sometimes help him with little things, So he had this interesting thing where he would suddenly start to yell out nonsensical phrases when he got happy about something. These words that had no meaning whatsoever. And he had 2 or 3 of them. But the one he said a lot, it sounded to me, maybe he would finish coloring something in, and he would go, Soren Narnia! Like what the hell is that? When I was in 3rd grade, like, what? And I'll kind of look at him like, oh, okay. But he would say that a lot. And as I listened to it, in my memory, decades later, thinking about that word, I thought, wait a minute, it kind of cuts in half. Soren Narnia. So the word itself was almost my little tribute to him, because in my mind it kind of captures. It was a very sad situation. This kid is mentally challenged. I don't know what happened to him. There's obviously going to be a long road. So even back then, I got a little sad thinking about him. But at the same time, he was capable of such joy, the likes of which I still remember. So I like that the joining of those 2 words somehow. I thought, that I'll pick that as a pen name, represent kind of the darkness and the light of how I see life playing out.
I loved reading about that, how you came up with that name.
Yeah, and he gave it to me by accident, purely by accident.
Yeah.
And I may be completely misinterpreting what he was saying, because this is from the distance of many years that I remembered as a kid.
Yeah, and when we remember something, we really remember our memories of it. So.
Yeah, I've been reading more and more about that, how unbelievably unreliable our memories are about everything.
Yeah.
How life, to get through life, what we're doing is just endlessly creating narratives that get us past these moments.
Yeah, I'm not one of the younger generation. I'm almost 50. Not as old as some in the room, but getting there. And I don't feel this need to endlessly document online and everything that I do. Otherwise, it quote unquote didn't happen.
Mm-hmm.
But I do know this about memory, and I just have this little journal that I basically use Google Keep. I take photos or write little notes, and I have a label called, of all things, journal. And I'll be like 10:32 p.m. Just finished reading this great book that I really liked, or 9:15, we just got back from the mall. It was a great day with my wife and son. Just little things like that. Not a whole, and I can look back on those things. And hey, that's when that happened, And of course, it works even better if you can do a picture or a short video. A lot of times I'll take a quick snapshot of something that's happening, my son and my wife, just doing something joyful in the living room. And hey, it's there. I can always remember that. Mm-hmm. So, I like I said, I don't feel this need to endlessly document, but memory is a very, very fickle thing. Yeah, you're right.
I find it amazing and mind-blowing that we're among the first couple of generations. You and I, when we think of our parents, we have an image of them as probably always being old. That's the traditional way of thinking of, because the media back then wasn't designed to capture them in their full glory of their youth. But your kids, my kids, everyone's kids, if you have them, they will be able to see us through this new technology that we have. They will see us as young and vibrant. They will see these documents. They will see these YouTube videos or these Facebook videos of us. And they will know us in a different way than previous generations in history ever have known their parents. They will be able to really identify with us as youthful people. So
possibly after I die, my son will even watch one of these.
Oh, not a chance in hell.
He has not today.
No, I mean, I didn't really get to see my parents so much in living, breathing video and audio when they were in their 20s.
Right.
Kids today will see their parents as they were in their 20s, talking and breathing in digital life. It's
using
incredible.
selfie sticks.
Right. Exactly.
Pete.
Well, no, you raise a good point, because you don't have this problem with your son right now, and you likely won't. But maybe his kids will feel that they want to know their grandfather better.
Yeah, that ancient old guy that's drooling and has a cane. Check out these YouTube videos.
Yeah.
And then once in a while, like, twice in a year, he said something that made sense, and it was really cool.
Yeah, and yeah, well, and Soren's making some good points. We know, I know what my parents looked like from still very, very bad still Polaroids, and maybe a few Super 8s.
If your family was rich, let's be honest here.
Super 8s. I had 8-track tapes, but
Super 8s were cameras.
Yes, I know, but we did not have those.
Like, I remember growing up, those old giant VHS camcorders, and
yes.
like, oh, my friend whose both his parents are doctors, they get one of those. I get to maybe like show up at the backside of a birthday party once on one.
Yeah, but if you step back a generation past that, you're lucky if you have a color picture.
Mm-hmm.
You're lucky if you have a large framed wedding photo.
I have seen 3 pictures of my grandmother on my mother's side. Only 3, because she died before I was born. My mom was 16. They didn't take many pictures back then.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And those that were, if you got a nice smile out of them, that was pretty rare.
Yeah.
They all seem so vaguely unhappy.
Yeah, and the funny thing is like the thing I connect with my grandparents most is my grandfather on my mother's side was a AAA baseball coach, and my grandmother kept the book, runs, hits, errors, the log book, the stats book.
Mm.
And I have some of those books, and I can pick them up, and I can see her handwriting, and I can see the snarky little comments that she wrote in the corners.
That's great. Yeah.
That was good.
And that is the conversation that we're having right now from back then. That is her husband is out coaching. She's seeing stuff going on in the field. She's keeping the stats book, but she's making comments that they will talk about later when he reads the stats book.
Yeah.
And it's sort of like one side of a conversation. But we're now way beyond that technology.
Mm-hmm.
And nothing ever dies on the internet until the internet dies. So how long are you going to be around, Mike?
Yeah. Well.
Yeah.
That also freaks me out, the longevity of everything we do now. If we put something out there, it ain't never going away.
No, somebody will find it.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's we went off on a tangent, but it's an extremely interesting tangent.
So I'm gonna go off on a little bit further one. Clifford Stoll, Stoll. He wrote The Cuckoo's Egg. This is the guy who was a radio astronomer who found the 1-cent charge on his account that busted the German spies that were hacking into the Department of Defense. So he went from being a radio astronomer to a computer security expert, and now he considers himself a computer contrarian. And the thing that he talks about is that right now, everybody is in this grand rush to get everything connected. And he's, and put computers and internet servers everywhere. And it's like, in the future, you will have to pay to be disconnected.
I think it'll also be, I foresee these vacations that people take where you will pay big money because, oh, on this vacation, we will take your phone away. We will, I think this will be a very big thing in the future. I agree.
Yeah.
I just started reading a book called AI Superpowers, China, Silicon Valley, and the New World Order. I forget the author's name right now, but he absolutely knows what he's talking about. And he talks about China right now. You know, they got this one app for everything, for messaging, for paying for things, for it's you have to be connected there. That's it. Anyway, back to Soren Narnia stuff. We were talking about Staircase adaptations. You know, interesting thing about Staircase, it's such a great story. There's so many creepy moments, and it seems to me, doing it visually, doing it as a short film or whatever, it could be done right. It could very easily be done wrong, if you want to look at terms in right and wrong. But it would be hard to capture some of those creepy feelings. You know, we're talking about audio and imagination, and it's hard to transport that to film, you know, I think.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think there's, for instance, a moment in that story where the villain, I guess you call her, just makes a certain gesture.
Yes.
And it's showing that visually, I don't think can ever add anything. It can be done really well, and I kind of look forward to seeing how people kind of approach that. And I've seen one example of it. That's a good example of, you know, no special effects can get at that primal terror of something, of seeing like that in your mind. That's all you need.
There's also a moment where that same villain looks out, if memory serves. It's been about 2 years since I've listened to this particular one. It was my first Soren Narnia story. And it hooked me, by the way. Where she is looking out the living room window and at some woods that are in the area. And the narrator makes some comments about that. And that's all I'll say, because I definitely don't want to spoil this for those who have not heard it. And that was one of the creepiest moments in the show, in an episode with multiple creepy moments, you know. So I can't even see how that could be done on film, but who knows? You never know. And like you said, I'm sure it's nice to see people think that much of your work, and you know, you giving them that permission to, hey, do something with it, you know, adapt it. So I think
what I'd like to see is, you know, I like, you know, a lot of writers will try to do too much, and I fall into that trap a lot. And I'm hoping that someone will come along, you know, take one of these stories and strip out when I put one layer too many, you know, when I tried too hard. It'd be nice to see what the result would have been had I not, you know, thought, oh, I got to do something more here. I got to do something more in this story. Because a lot of times you don't have to do anything more.
Do you have a favorite Knifepoint Horror episode, or one that you're most proud of? I mean, I'm speaking now of the ones that you've written and narrated.
I like any of them that involve the most extreme isolation, and the most I like it when the elements come into play, when there's like a wintry landscape, because to me nature is just essentially terrifying. Anything set in the mountains, or where the narrators realize, oh, I thought I was alone. Wait, I'm really alone.
Fields comes to mind.
Right. So a story, I think I called it Legend. The guy goes off to finds himself in a town where he realizes there's no one else in this town this weekend, and the woman who has rented me this room in this bed and breakfast, she's gone, and here comes the snow. And the forecast is so I love 5 or 6, I think, ones I've done lean pretty heavily on wind, rain, snow, and someone realizing that there's far more alone than they actually even thought. I like those are the ones always my favorites.
Okay. What about and guys, if you have questions for Soren, interrupt me. It's fine. Please. Pete. What about, do you have favorite horror short stories, favorite horror novels that come to mind?
I caught like The Monkey's Paw. I caught at the perfect age when I was very young. I still think that's maybe the greatest one I've ever read. In terms of knowing when to stop and knowing what not to explain. Novels, I grew up, a fair amount of my adolescence was handed over to Stephen King for whatever purposes he desired.
Can I interrupt you? It's interesting that you said just now knowing when not to explain. I'm such a huge fan of that done right. Mm-hmm. And I do think a lot of Stephen King, as many people do, obviously. I just finished reading one of his latest books, The Outsider, which is going to be an HBO series, by the way, soon. But at the end of that book, I felt I loved the book until the end. And he explained just a little bit too much. Mm-hmm. And it took away a bit of the magic for me. Right. So anyway, yeah. Favorite stories and authors. And then,
I was going to say, on the topic of something becoming a series, I don't know how you feel about this trend, but what I find is that the series format, they will explain far too much. Because the story, probably the essence of The Outsider, I haven't read it, but probably the essence could probably be done very well in a 2-hour movie. But now we're going to need to stretch, so we need a series. So we're going to need to show more. We're going to need to show everything. So I bet you that I have a feeling it'll probably suffer a little bit.
I said that about the first season of Stranger Things. That Stranger Things is a great show, but that first season was about 2 episodes too long. Ben?
And I was going to say, as bad as it is for, say, modern series where 13 episodes is the norm, look back at 7-8 years ago, 22 episodes was the expected number.
Right. The first season of Heroes, how it suffered from that.
Oh, that's a perfect example. But you can even look. I watched back Twin Peaks recently before the new season, and kind of seeing how they were forced to stretch the show out because once they solved the mystery, that might have been it. And even though, like the 3rd season, obviously that's not an issue. By the time they got to that point, they sort of lost their way with the show. And I think that happens with The Killing is another great example. The mystery should have been 1 season, and they stretched out to 2 seasons. By the end of the 2nd season, no one's watching the show. And Stranger Things had a lot going for it. I don't think it was stretched out too far, but that 2nd season sure had a couple episodes they could have cut out would have helped a lot.
Episode 7, I think. I think it was 7.
If it's the episode where she goes and visits her sister or whatever.
Yeah, something like that. Rick?
Everyone agrees.
Yeah, I just want to say in the late 50s TV series with 34 episodes.
Oh my God.
You can find some for free on Amazon. I was watching Yancey Derringer, which was a Western. It was 34 episodes.
Well, now some of the longer running British shows that I see a season is now 4 or 6 episodes.
Yeah, and I was going to bring up.
I love that.
Oh, and that's because they make it specifically to order. So it's like if the story is 6 episodes, then they tell it in 6.
And they don't feel this pressure to season 2 absolutely must be next year. No,
right.
We're going to get it done and get it done right when we're damn well ready.
Which is like Luther's the one I always think of where there were years in between some of the seasons, and it was good. True Detective, season 1 to 2, they had to rush it out the door, and then they got to wait a couple of years for the next season, and it was much improved. And I think, we'll see how that shakes out. I think I'm hoping that they're starting to see that, like, well, we can save money if we only do 8 episodes, not 13 for every single show.
Yeah, the demands of series TV, I think it's starting to change people's perceptions of what a good adaptation of, say, a book is. Because the art had always been, well, you take the essence of what that story is about, you distill it to 2.5 hours. Now, there's a fanboyism where people want to see, well, now we can show them every scene from that book, and that's what they want. That's what people want. They want every character. They want every shot, every scene, because that will make the people on the internet happy. Like, they didn't cut anything out of my adaptation of my favorite book. Netflix and all these cable channels, they need to fill up 24 hours a day constantly. So now the definition of an adaptation, of a good adaptation, I think is going to start to change, and maybe not in such a great way. Where a really good adaptation is where you turn it into 4 seasons. And you show everything. And then not only do you show everything, but you build upon that universe. And it's all leading to a great deal of bloat from what I've seen.
I don't disagree. I would just add to that, my personal opinion is that it depends on the book. So some books should be 1.5 to 2 hour movies. Others, Stephen King's The Gunslinger.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know what the hell business that has being a movie. It should be a TV series, because I mean that's a lot of story.
Right. Yeah. All the books together, that I think I agree that deserves a little something extra. Yeah.
So, but anyway, yeah. I think you're right with the caveat of it may depend on the book.
Well, and so I am a big fan of Alan Moore's Watchmen.
Mm-hmm.
And
ditto.
When the film came out and I watched that opening sequence, I teared up a little. That opening sequence captures the feel of the book so well. It gives the background, and it establishes the universe. It establishes where the timeline deviates. It does it so well that I felt that it captured some of the critical scenes in the book in a very artistic way.
Yeah, I agree. I think that is what I look for in adaptation. I think what is the story really about? Forget how many characters there are. Forget how many locations, how many scene changing. What is this story about? Let's make it about that, and not try to faithfully reenact every scene.
Yeah, Watchmen comic enthusiasts many times they disagree with this, but I think that's one of the best superhero movies ever made. I think, as far as the ending goes, it improved upon it. So,
yeah, I still go back and I watch it, and I still say, okay, there are the things that I missed that were in the book but aren't in the film don't really matter that much.
Yeah. Did you watch the director's cut?
Yeah.
Which had the extra stuff like the death of certain characters.
Right.
And I did too. And oddly enough, I don't usually feel this way, but oddly enough, I preferred the original cut over the director's cut.
Yeah, I would agree there. I think the theatrical cut, they removed just enough. And it's always hard to say as a fan, like, what is too much, what's not enough. If you have a particular scene you really enjoyed, but in Watchmen, I mean, cutting out, for example, all the stuff about all the writers and artists, was that they get sent off to an island to create the, for the finale. I mean, I'm assuming everyone watching this has read Watchmen, but they create a fake monster basically, and the movie cuts that whole storyline out, comes up with a much better reason to stop nuclear war.
Yeah.
And I really think part of what the movie benefited from is they were really forced to cut down material And Zack Snyder is not a perfect director, but I walked out of that theater really impressed, and I was shocked to find online everyone hated it.
Yeah, the things the things that I miss are the little world building things, the electric cars, the when the Owl and Silk Spectre go to Silk whatever go to dinner. People in the background are having a turkey, but it has 4 drumsticks. Because everybody wants a drumstick, so the turkeys now have 4. Those little things that
maybe you'll see them in the upcoming TV series.
Yeah, maybe, but it was all those little things, those little world buildings. If you bought the DVDs, you got the Black Pirate comic. But in the comic itself, it went into the fact that because they actually had superheroes, pirate comics were the big thing. They didn't get superhero comics because they had them.
Right.
It's pirate comics. So, those tiny little things, really kind of thrilled me because they're nice little world building things that titillate writers and readers, but they're hard to translate onto the big screen, and they're probably not necessary to tell the story.
Here's the problem with Watchmen. It was translated very well, but the problem is the movie came out in 2009, and there are a lot of people read it in the mid 80s who are really, really invested in exactly the way it went down in the comic.
Yeah.
And you have to open yourself up and say, okay, this is this director writer's interpretation of it.
Right.
So it's not a dichotomy of this sucks because it's not exactly like the comic.
And for the coming TV series, which Damon Lindelof is involved in, I'm expecting it to be stretched out to when we talk about bloat, I can't even imagine what he's going to do to it. It just there's no way it's going to be near as good as the movie or the original book. It's just going to make everyone angry.
That could be. I
read the graphic novel and I really liked it. I stayed away from any adaptation because I thought to me this story is a tragedy. It's full of sadness. It's about people making horrible mistakes, and it's about a world that's barely worth living in. And should they even bother trying to save it? And I thought,
like Avengers: Infinity War.
I haven't seen it. But I thought there's no way that Hollywood is going to see the same things in the story and deliver that on the screen what I saw, because I especially Zack Snyder, not so much the tragedian. So I said no. I think it's going to get louder. It's not going to be this quiet drama that I see in my mind. So I never tried to watch it.
Well, I think you should. Let me put it to you this way. I'll say this and this only. It rains the entire damn movie, except at the very end.
I gotta say though, as a dissenting voice, I much preferred the comic, and I thought the movie was fair compared to the book itself. It was too much out of its time now. That's how I viewed it.
I can understand arguing it's out of its time. It is a very 80s graphic novel. It's very much, this is how in 1980 we would imagine the future. I can certainly see that. I think there are a lot of science fiction works that that are dealing with the near future where that's a problem. And I always think of Escape from New York is made in like 1981, and like 10 years later, Manhattan's a prison colony. So I can certainly understand that argument, but I would say that I would side with Mike here, that I think the important elements they really did carry across into the film, and they did their best translating it.
Well, let's not forget that Ghostbusters 2 said that the world would end on February 14th, 2019.
Oh,
it was 2019. I thought it was 2015. Somebody needs to look this up. I think it already happened, Pete. Not this year.
Did I say 2019, February 14th, 2019.
Valentine's Day.
Valentine's
Bummer.
Day.
So Soren, you talked about some of your favorite stories, favorite books, favorite authors. Do you want to throw any of those more in the mix before I ask you about? Well, you don't really. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I got I read Dracula. My grandmother gave me like the Scholastic edition of Dracula when I was a kid, and of course, I graduated quickly to the real thing. I still think that's one of the best things I've ever read. I got started on Edgar Allan Poe real early, and just recently I read some of the Poe stories I read as a little kid, thinking, why would they think it was okay to expose me to this? Some of this stuff is just absolutely horrifying. The Black Cat and the Cask of Amontillado. I was 8 years old. What are you doing? I read. I stumbled across The Willows by Algernon Blackwood when I was 10. So I had a very had a good, like, very basic education in really scary, low key stuff when I was really young, and I think that really embedded itself. So I kind of got stuck there.
I'm not sure how personal you want to get. It's totally up to you. But what do you do when you're not writing or narrating?
I'm an editor, not of any real creative writing, but I work in a place that publishes various newsletters. I'm often able to do a little bit of writing and daydreaming at work because I'm very clever. I have the monitor tilted just in such a way so that if anyone comes in, it's very easy to look like really busy. You just put a hand to the chin, and you kind of look like you're vaguely unhappy with something on an Excel spreadsheet.
Oh, absolutely. I've seen Office Space.
Yeah, there's an art to that. I wish, the young, if I could tell the young people of America one thing, it's learn how to fake work at work. It's very important. So I'm very good at doing that. So I'm sometimes outlining at work and so forth. But
if I could tell the young people of America one thing, it would be if you missed the movie Office Space, you need to watch it. So, because it deals with this, and it's important stuff.
It is important stuff.
Yeah. Also, get a desk which the terminal is not so somebody can't come behind your back.
Right.
Right. It amazes me that
you're facing the people.
Yeah, there are people where I work who have it, you can see what's on their monitor as you walk down the hallway. I'm like, what are you doing? I mean, how do you surf the internet that way? It's ridiculous.
So it's kind of a 9-to-5 job. You're off on weekends, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
So okay.
I can honestly say I'm one of the few people who thinks he has plenty of time to do the writing that he wants to do. I've never thought I just don't have the time. It's really, I feel I waste, like everyone, I waste so much time with nonsense. So I can never make that complaint that I don't have the time. I actually do.
Well, don't answer this if you don't want to, but are you single? Have kids? Married?
I am. I'm a single guy in this little tiny apartment where I've been cooped up for many years. So I have more free time. Than most people.
Did you delete your Twitter account?
Oh, yes.
Now we're on the tough questions, man.
Oh, the social media. Yeah. I was kind of looking to sort of do the old declutterization of life itself. Mm-hmm. I thought life was moving a bit too fast. It was too involved in too many ways.
Oh, you won't get an argument from me there. Yeah.
Yeah. And social media itself, I began to find more and more kind of like an unpleasant window into unpleasant aspects of the madness of crowds, group mentality. And it just wasn't, it was one of those soft addictions. I'm always, let me just check Twitter, let me check Facebook and so forth. So I thought, let me do the detox since everyone I knew was trying it. And I think it was a good thing. So I was having fun. But it was just one of the things that felt like it had to go so I could sort of live a quieter, easier existence.
Yeah, I can honestly say, I mean, I have a lot going on, but I don't really look at Twitter. I mean, I tweet. sometimes,
Mhm.
but I don't really take time to go down my Twitter timeline much. Hardly at all. Same with Facebook. You know, I'll post, but I don't really go down that Facebook timeline and look at posts. Not too much anyway. I've got a couple of close friends, you know, guys like, you know, Pete, Kelly Young, those guys who I've started them so they come up first in my feed. So if I look at my feed, I'll like go down for about 30 seconds and see what those guys are up to, and that's about it.
Wait,
Yeah.
you're living vicariously through my life? Oh shit.
Well, you
That
know,
is a
just
lot
what
of
you choose to share.
That is a lot of responsibility.
Well, you know, I'll let you know if you go wrong anywhere.
All right.
So, but yeah, you know, simplicity. Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, I thought when I got on Twitter that everyone would just be making corny jokes and posting silly things, and I slowly whittled down my list of who I saw to those people. But even that, Twitter and Facebook, they want you to see outside of it. They want to push certain storylines to you, and so I found myself unable to avoid seeing political talk or people sniping at each other. It was too tough to actually avoid. So I thought, well, I'll just, let me just get out of the world entirely for a while and see how that feels. It feels pretty good.
Yeah. Last question I have for you is about you have another podcast, and these snowy nights you read to me, they'll never be forgotten.
Mm.
And I'll admit I have not listened to any of these stories yet because, you know, I'm a horror fan. I listen to your horror podcast, but I don't just, for example, read horror. I read crime fiction. I read other things. What kind of podcast is this?
That's basically the repository of everything non-horror that I write of substantial length. So I'll do some horror, and then I want to kind of take a break and indulge myself in some other types of genres, everything across the board. So that's where all that goes. So it's kind of a mixed bag. There's a couple things on there that are somewhat close to horror, but so I kind of separate the two. Of course, that one doesn't nearly get the interest that the horror stuff does, and maybe rightfully so. So it's definitely a mixed bag, and some of it maybe just doesn't work. But I never really wanted to be a horror writer specifically, so other ideas just keep creeping through, and I have to sort of entertain them.
Well, I love the title of the podcast. Those snowy nights you read to me, they'll never be forgotten. Yeah. Anyone interested, it's www.thosesnowynights.libsyn.com, and Libsyn is Libsyn. Of course, I guess you could probably just Google Soren Narnia and Snowy Nights, and it'll probably take you right to it as well.
Yeah, anyone who's really more interested in really dark stuff and horror stuff, there's a couple on there, a couple very long audio stories. One called An Oral History of Hell, which is super dark, and then I have my my zombie novel on there called Song of the Living Dead. It's kind of a different take on the whole zombie genre. I always wanted to try something with zombies, so that was my go with that.
All right. Well, do you want to stick? We're going to talk a few more minutes. You want to stick with us like you did last time, or do you need to run?
Yeah, definitely.
All right. I know Ben has to go soon. So, Ben, you are working on an essay on racism. I'm reading this now in cosmic horror as portrayed in Ballad of Black Tom and Lovecraft Country.
Yeah. So normally when we hear racism in Lovecraft, we always look at the one side of Lovecraft's sort of fears and biases and how they affected his story writing. Sometimes very overtly, like in the horror Red Hook. Sometimes subtle enough that like 13-year-old me didn't see it in the shadow over Innsmouth. And when I first read The Ballad of Black Tom, so it's written by Victor Lavelle, who's a Black author from New York. And he takes the horror at Red Hook and he sort of spins the idea around. So the cosmic horror, this idea of some great unstoppable force that you're insignificant towards, instead of that being immigration and other races or whatever he was Lovecraft was writing about, he turns it, and it's the racism of the time. And the idea that in The Ballad of Black Tom, it's Tommy Tester. The horror isn't just what he's dealing with the Cthulhu mythos elements, but more of the police just randomly break into his house, being followed around and stopped and frisked and having all his money taken for no reason. Matt Ruff in Lovecraft Country, I think, also did a wonderful job kind of showing this, where the idea of going to Lovecraft Country, which has that dual meaning of New England area, but also dealing with sort of these weird fiction elements. But then at the end of the story, they talk about how they have to go to Jim Crow country. And they speak of that with more dread than they do the Lovecraftian elements. So I thought that was like an interesting twist, this idea of maybe this big thing we're struggling against, this cosmic horror. It's not necessarily the great old ones. Maybe it's just segregation laws in the 1920s, for example. And it was kind of interesting because I was looking up, like, there are different types of racism and how they're portrayed in the stories. There's ways that Lovecraft wrote things that maybe he didn't necessarily intend them to come across a certain way, and they're become very obvious. And then just thinking about Victor Lavelle, for example, talks in an interview about what it's like as a science fiction and horror fan when he was a teenager, and he reads Lovecraft the first time, doesn't see any of this stuff. And then when he's 15, he goes back and reads it again and is just shocked. Like, he can't believe what he's reading. He's like, oh my gosh, his cat was named what? And I thought that was kind of it. Like, what would that experience be like if you're that person that you fall in love with this writing, this style, this horror, it's brilliant, and then you find out what that person actually would have thought of you.
Can I just comment? There's a beautiful letter that Victor Lavelle wrote, recently published. It circulated on the internet for a bit, how he was practically brought to tears by Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse, because the protagonist was a kid like him, something he didn't have when he was growing up. And his kids are like coming out of the movie and they're pretending to be shooting web things across the lobby and swinging, and they just don't understand why Daddy's so emotional about how important this movie was to him.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think it's an element that we often don't think about. We're generally speaking on this podcast, for example, we're that quote unquote privileged group, right? And I don't mean privileged like we're all rich. I mean, maybe Pete is, I don't know. He has a sarcophagus in there, but the rest of us, we're struggling.
It's a tanning bed, I think, but yeah.
Oh, well, but there are types of privilege we don't generally think about. So, for example, identifying with a protagonist in a film or a novel, it can be easy sometimes to forget that as a child, when you see someone on the screen that looks like you or is in a similar situation, that's what you get attached to. And it's something that there's a large segment of our population that didn't have that. And I don't know what that feels like. I'm a white male, but I can see how that would affect things, because I remember growing up, and that was why I was obsessed with things like Spider-Man. Oh, Spider-Man's this nerdy kid who has trouble at school and gets bullied. Oh, but he puts on the costume. And I could see if you're, in Victor Lavelle's case, he's Black and Puerto Rican. So Miles Morales is the background of his character is especially moving. And I can imagine the reverse, that idea of you're reading this great Lovecraft story, and then you find out the name of the cat. And that's got to really kind of take you out of the story when you're older and make it really hard to. Now, he does a great job of kind of separating the work from the author, and he points out all the great things about, the weird fiction that was created. But I also understand clearly why there are a lot of writers who are disgusted by the idea of celebrating Lovecraft's work. And I can imagine if you're one of those people reading that story, that's got to be really painful. So it's great we're in a generation now where we're moving past that. I'm glad Into the Spider-Verse has had such an effect on people. I think Black Panther is another great example. But it's I really think in especially this idea of cosmic horror and you're an insignificant thing in the universe. I just thought it was really interesting to see that, like, well, maybe the thing you're insignificant against is the system that's built around you, the innate racism of the culture around you. And I'm sure Lovecraft would not have appreciated this outlook. I'm sure maybe certain very famous and popular Lovecraft editors would disapprove of my reading of this, but
I'll tell you somebody who runs a podcast / publishing small press / whatever it is I do, called the Lovecraft Easing. To me, Lovecraft is kind of this short term to cosmic horror. Made more sense than to call it, hey, the cosmic horror / weird fiction website or whatever. But yeah, I have very little doubt that I have no doubt, as far as I'm concerned, and very little doubt of the people on this panel and a lot of people that I know. If Lovecraft were alive today, I don't want to be friends with that kind of guy. What an asshole.
I mean, the best you ever hear is, oh, well, if he were alive today, he wouldn't be like that. And it's like, well, I don't know that that's a good defense. But again, like, I'm able to look at, that idea of separating the author. There are a lot of authors in history we would really despise if we knew on a personal level, I'm sure.
Sure. Thomas Jefferson.
Oh, that's a great example, right? But I think this idea, I think there is also an element of cosmic horror fiction that has been, I don't want to say it's been ignored, but recently it's getting a lot more attention. And your Ballad of Black Toms, your Lovecraft Country. I know there are examples that I'm not aware of or I'm forgetting off the top of my head, but Heroes of Red Hook, apparently. I can't read.
That's the whole premise behind this book.
Yeah, the Heroes of Red Hook is an anthology edited by Brian Sammons and I'm sorry,
Oscar Rios.
Okay, yeah. Is this essay going to be available, say, like online at some point, Ben? I know you have to go in a sec.
It will. I really need to sit down and kind of expand certain other areas and smooth out the language of it. But I think so. I'm going to read that anthology as soon as. Is it available on Kindle?
That I don't know. Maybe.
I'm going to get my hands on that as soon as possible. But this to me really spoke because it's a form of cosmic horror fiction that I think is it's new while at the same time being old. I think it's great when you can sort of turn something on its head and still tell a great story. I would argue in the case of the Ballad of Black Tom and Horror Red Hook, a significantly better story. And the world's large enough we can tell all of these stories, so it's fantastic.
Well, as just a small note to end that, my personal rule doesn't have to be anybody else's rule. My personal rule is if an author was an asshole and they're now dead, I'm fine with reading their work. If an author is an asshole and they're still alive, there are so many other books that I could be reading because that person still has an opportunity to change, and in many cases doesn't. So whether that rule makes sense to anybody else or not, that's my rule. So.
Yeah, I 100% agree with that rule, and I've actually heard that from several people lately. That if they're still alive,
yeah, it's a trendsetters here. Yeah, go ahead.
But I mean, I think that's a great way to look at things. I mean, my to read list is something like 2,000 books long.
Yeah.
Soren has an advantage because all of his stuff is audio, and I live in LA where I spend 4 hours a day on the freeway. So I'll be able to make my way through his entire catalog before the end of next week, probably.
4 hours going 8 miles, right? Yep.
It's 19 miles. It's 19 miles.
I don't know how you do it. All right, man. I know you got to go, but I wanted to ask you about that before you left.
I do. So, thank you very much.
Yeah. Thanks, Ben. See you soon. Our friend Philip Fracassi, who is AWOL, posted about Whitley Strieber, and there's an article on medium.com, and the title is "He was supposed to be the next Stephen King, then the aliens came," and I think Whitley Strieber may be insane, but he's also this really interesting guy. You know what I mean?
I told you I was living in one of his houses when I was in San Antonio, didn't I? We bought his house so he could move to California.
That was nice of you.
Well, the first year that we lived in it, we would still have people come knocking on the door asking about UFO stuff.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I don't think he's hurting for money or anything. And this next Stephen King thing, I mean, how many people has that been said about? But I don't even know that an email from me would be returned, but I would love to get that guy on this show just to talk. His fiction book. What?
Well, there's no reason why he couldn't be on the show.
I'd like to have him on the show. Yeah.
Forbidden Zone is overtly Lovecraftian. I keep the Wolfen in my Lovecraft section. I've always thought the Wolfen were
great book.
Yeah, but to me, it's not a werewolf book. To me, it's a hidden race book.
His book that it's not like Communion. It's entirely fictional, is my understanding. Majestic, I've read twice, which does deal with UFOs, deals with Roswell. But man, it's such an interesting read. It puts you right there in the desert and what it must have been like there. I highly recommend that book. And as Pete said, Wolfen.
Yeah, The Hunger is pretty good too.
It's when I was reading a horror anthology, and I only knew him as the Communion guy. And there was a story in this anthology called The Pool, which he wrote. I've never forgotten that story because it was so haunting, so well written. I thought, ooh, this guy is good. He is serious.
Yeah, he's a good writer. I met him once, said hello. That was about it. At I can't believe I'm admitting this, UFO convention. In my defense, I was young. It was like 1997 or something. So,
one of the most I'm fascinated. There's a guy, a friend of a friend of a friend, who writes a blog. I think it's called The Night Shirt. And I met him a couple of times. He's a super intelligent, super rational guy. And it turns out that he wrote a blog about UFOs. But if you read it, it's been a while since I've read it. It is so intelligently written, and he's somewhat skeptical himself, but he's half a believer also. And that really kind of put the zap on my brain, saying, well, there is. So I know someone personally who does believe in this phenomenon, but is so educated and knowledgeable about it and writes so well that it starts to make you think differently about things.
I also think that it's entirely possible and legit to be a skeptic, but as Sagan said, not exactly this way, paraphrasing badly, you have a skeptic's mind, but with an imagination. You don't accept things without evidence, but imagine anything. He would have loved to seen an alien, and he wasn't going to believe in one unless he saw evidence. And as he said, extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. So, and I think it's very possible to be a skeptic, to be someone who the word skeptic gets a bad rap, but it's very possible to be someone who is very evidence-based thinking and still be fascinated by the phenomena of, the UFO culture and these people who believe these things and claim they've seen these things and so on and so forth. I don't know. When everything in the world is videotaped these days, it's hard for me to believe that no one's videotaped a UFO yet. But
well, Mike, with the modern fake video capabilities that are just around the corner, you're going to see alien porn on.
Well, speaking of AI earlier, there's scary AI videos already out there that, you know, I think there's one where Barack Obama gives a speech that he never gave, you know. So
I tell you guys, it's funny. Just a couple weeks ago, someone sent me a 5-minute. It was a YouTube video posted by a digital effects production company, and it was just showing examples of their work, common everyday work they do for films. And it was a series of before and after shots. And until that moment, I had not realized, maybe you all had, the level of fakery that we are seeing in movies and TV, at even in the most basic of shots. I didn't realize, for example, that it's very rare that there are actual street scenes anymore that are done live. That it's all in the studio, and the foreground and the background and everything is green screen, because they can green screen tiny isolated patches anywhere they feel like it. So there was a shot of a character coming out of a building in New York City, walking across the sidewalk and getting into a cab. It turns out nothing was there except the person and the cab, even the building.
That's amazing.
And that was kind of a shocking thing to realize, that when I watch a movie now on TV, I have no idea anymore, since I saw that video, what's there and what's not there.
You know, it makes me think of the Pete, the Kolchak series, where in several of the episodes, I'm specifically thinking right now of the what was the one where they think the guy was eaten by rats at the beginning. I forget the name.
The Rakshasa.
Yes, the Rakshasa. But what was the name of that episode? You remember? Rick probably remembers. But anyway, you know, he's
Horror in the Heights.
Horror in the Heights. Yes,
right.
One of my favorite episodes. And you know, Kolchak's he's driving around Chicago, and it's just real as hell. And you know it's real as hell because it's 1973, for Pete's sake, and I love it. You know, I just love it. So yeah, Soren, you're right. It's amazing what they can do.
You know, Sunday mornings, you know, I watch Columbo, and you know, you see the same things. It's just like, you know, that these are actually filmed out on the street because they didn't have the technology to do what they do now.
Do you go to church every Sunday, Mr. Relic? No, I watch. I go to the Church of Columbo.
His God is Columbo.
Yeah, I don't know if you guys, something as sad has happened to me in the years since digital effects have happened, is that I've lost my capacity for wonder at anything I see on the screen, because I know that they didn't really go to this mountain. There is not 10,000 extras that they hired. They are not dragging this boat over. I know this is not true. I know this is all computer generated.
Right.
So everything I see on the screen, I remember I watched Annihilation recently. I thought some of the shots were spectacular, but then I appreciated them on an intellectual level. Like, look how cool that looks. But I did not have a sense of wonder about it, because I knew, well, it's just 40 people in front of Macintoshes creating these. And I'm wondering, like, will I ever go to a theater again? And will my jaw drop at what I'm seeing, because I think, wow, they actually pulled this off somehow? Or are those days over?
Bruce Campbell recently in a video was talking about how when you meet a celebrity, like he met William Shatner. So he goes, when you meet William Shatner, you don't want to say, oh my God, I love you in Star Trek and everything. He's heard this 1 billion times. No, what you do is, he goes, what I did was I brought up TJ Hooker. And I said, there's these scenes in TJ Hooker where you're flying down the street in the car, and then you stop and it spins and everything. And he's like, I know it's you doing it. Can you tell me how you did that? And William Shatner was so excited about that question, he wouldn't shut up. And, you know, Bruce Campbell's just listening to him. And then when he does Ash versus the Evil Dead, he's got a scene where he can do that. And he said, I actually did that myself because I talked to Bill Shatner about it. So
Okay,
yeah, but you know, it's rare. Yeah.
the opposite. Do you remember the guy who's the star? You saw The Crying Game back in the 90s, maybe?
Yeah, Forrest Whitaker.
No, but the who was the other guy? The guy who played the cross-dresser. He was in subsequently. He was terrible to work with. Apparently, when he got a little bit of fame. He was then in a movie about an Egyptian god.
Stargate.
Okay,
Yeah, Stargate.
this movie was so bad that instead of hiring extras, they put scarecrows up in the crowd scenes around the back. And so they had like maybe 10 guys jumping up and down and waving spears. Then all the rest of the crowd was like dummies.
Was it really that bad? I don't remember that. Kind of liked the movie.
It launched a TV series.
It's worth watching the crowd scenes just for that. So special effects have come a long way.
It must have done pretty well because it did. We got a TV spin-off.
Quite a few TV spin-offs, actually.
Yeah, Sci-Fi Network milked it for what it was worth.
All right, The Outsider, I already mentioned that. I will only add that I did read the book, and I also listened to parts of the book when I wanted to continue, quote unquote, reading it, but go to bed. Thanks, Matt, for the CDs. I just want to say Will Patton did a absolutely fabulous job reading this. Really good read. If you want to get The Outsider on Audible or CD, you know, if you're old and have an AOL account like Matt, you can get them in CD. Hey, the joke's on you. Most of the people who consume this show just listen to it, so they didn't see you flip me off, Matt. So anyway, our friend John Langan has a what? Sorry?
I'm going to start a podcast just of AOL subscribers. People are still in there. We're just going to talk about it.
Oh, I'm sorry. You're an AOL.
Yeah, that's right.
That's right.
You could not be more proud.
Our friend John Langan has a book coming out soon called Saphira and Other Betrayals. Let's see here. Hippocampus is putting that out. It's coming out in April. Derek Cossey, the publisher at Hippocampus. I sent this to you guys, the fellow panelists, in Kindle format from Derek. He says if you want a print art to let me know and I'll let him know. I linked to it in the show notes. You know, anything John Langan writes is worth reading. I'm not getting paid to say this. Introduction by Paul Tremblay. You can get the limited cloth for $45, or there's going to be obviously much cheaper versions too. So let's see here. Yeah, anthology. I don't remember how many stories it is, but anyway, I just wanted to make everybody aware that that is coming out. Speaking of audio, we're all fans of Ted Klein's Black Man with a Horn novella, short story, whatever, right?
Yep.
Yes and no.
Brilliant.
Yes and no. Okay. Well, anyway.
I'm a fan of the story. I think it's been overpublished.
I thought it was only published twice.
Oh, I think I've got 5
Oh,
copies.
it's been sologized a lot.
Well, here's a twist on that.
Unlike A Study in Emerald.
Yes,
Yeah.
It's very hard to find a copy of The Study in Emerald. If you find one, it's probably worth, you know, as much as Action Comics #1. But anyway, one of the people who republished it is Ross Lockhart with the Book of Cthulhu.
Yeah.
In 2011, Ross is a really nice guy, great publisher. You can get this from Amazon. You can my point is you can also get it from Audible. And I thought the other day, man, I'd really like to read this story again, but I want to listen to it. I wonder if there's been any audio editions of this at all. You know, unlike Children of the Kingdom, for example, I don't think there is any by Ted Klein. And yeah, there's an audible edition of the Book of Cthulhu, which of course includes Black Man with a Horn. A narrator by the name of Fleet Cooper does a really great job with it. So if you're a Audible subscriber, you like that story, and if you're into Lovecraft and you haven't bought that book, you know, I assume you're into Lovecraft if you're listening to this. Anyway, it was very well done.
If you're talking about audio dramas, we could plug that the HP Lovecraft Society has done another Call of Cthulhu role-playing campaign, The Mass of Nyarlathotep.
It's a role-playing campaign or an audio drama?
It's an audio drama based on the role-playing campaign.
Oh, okay. All right.
So they dramatize a Call of Cthulhu adventure. It's a little expensive because it's six discs. I think it's about $50 to $60.
Okay.
But it's enjoyable. It's pulpy in an action sense, a little too drawn out and repetitive, but it gets fun by the last disc.
They've done a lot of Lovecraftian audio dramas now, and Dark Adventure Radio Theater. You can Google that, and man, they do a tremendous job.
They're going to have to go into his revisions very soon because they've done almost every story I can think of.
Well, I think they ought to find some really some of the really great Lovecraftian fiction out there, short stories or novellas out there not written by Lovecraft, and dramatize them.
Yeah, I agree with you on that. They do from the. I would like to see the Space Eaters by Frank Belknap Long dramatized correctly.
Yeah, just to clarify, Black Man with a Horn and The Outsider, you know, Book of Cthulhu 2, those are audio books, not audio dramas, which I love both. So I've got some other things to talk about, but we're getting close to 2 hours here. You guys have anything?
Yeah, one thing. I just found a new webcomic. It's been going on since 2011. Unfortunately, now the author's on a little bit of a hiatus. It's called False Positive.
There's a lot there to read, though, even though he's on a hiatus. That's good stuff.
It is bloody brilliant. It is very cosmic horror type stuff. There's lots of little different storylines you can follow. The guy's name is Mike Walton. It's really brilliant. I'll put a link on the Facebook page.
And I posted about it on the easing page, the big page as well, the other day. I have here, I'll talk about this next week. I have here several lists of horror movies, current horror movies on Netflix. And I think that would be interesting to talk about. Several different websites say, you know, these are the best, and I agree with some, disagree with others. You guys have anything else you want to talk about?
Yeah, I have a question since we're talking horror movies. I recently learned, you might have discussed this before in a show I wasn't on, that there is a Mexican horror movie based on the writings of Joel Culver called The Rules of Ruin.
There is.
It was shown at the Portland October Lovecraft Film Festival.
Well, I got to get my hands on this.
I'm trying to find out where I can see it. It's not on Netflix. So if anybody,
it was at the Lovecraft Film Festival.
Yes.
Then you can just write to Brian or Gwen.
Okay. It's a feature-length movie. It's at least 90 minutes long.
Yeah, Brian or Gwen can give you the information on that.
Yeah.
If you don't have their email. Oh, is it?
Yeah. It's mentioned on their website. I'm trying to figure out. Apparently, it was in October 2018. Yeah.
I was there and I missed it.
Man, I missed Joe.
Las Reglas de la Ruina.
Basically, the plot. It's basically a plot where somebody gets a Necronomicon book. In this case, the book is a Joe Poe recreation.
Yeah, Regulus de la Ruina. Yeah. Joe wrote that. Yes.
And Livia Llewellyn did a history of it for the story Wisdom.
Right.
All right. Well, we'll put a pin on it there, and that's great. It's a good problem to have when I have more topics than time, because we can talk about them next week. Soren, thank you so much for being on the show, man. I sincerely always enjoy talking to you, and I sincerely love Knifepoint Horror. It's such a great podcast.
Oh, thank you. I'll be getting back to it soon. I know it's been a few months since I had anything up there, but yeah, it'll keep going.
Well, like you said, you're in total control. You're not trying to meet some deadline. You want to get it done right.
Only yours, yeah. So
only mine is once a week, whether it's good or not.
Yeah. No, but I love being here. This is I love it. This is great. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, well, thanks for coming on again. And all right, everybody, thanks for listening. Next week, we've got SP Muskowski, and then the week after that, Pete, you're pretty much in charge, because we're going to be interviewing, at least for the first hour, you're going to be interviewing Mallory O'Meara. So that's 2 weeks from now, March 3rd. Tell me you remember this. You're muted.
I remember it. I just, realizing that I've double booked myself for that day, but that's okay. I'll be here.
Whatever it is, can't possibly be as important, can it? I'm
a guest at a local Comic-Con.
Oh, well, do you want to move Mallory to a different day?
No, I don't.
I don't either. I just want to point out before we go, this is going to be cool. This is tentative, but it's probably going to be this date, March 31st. Several of the folks from Pseudopod are going to be here. And man, I've been listening to those guys for, wow. How long have they been on the air? 12 years? Something like that? I don't know. But those guys are great. So they'll be on that date. And if not that date, somewhere around there. It's penciled in as of this point. So, hey, everyone, thank you for listening to the show every week and or watching the show. I really, really appreciate the Patreons. Had a few difficulties in my life, as I think most listeners know, with my family the last couple of months. And I haven't put out as many Patreon podcasts as I like, but I do have 2 more coming this month. So we're going to make up for that. So thanks for sticking with me on that. If you want more podcasts, it's all it is $5 a month. So, like I say, less than the cost of going to McDonald's. And just Google Lovecraft Easing Patreons. Those pen sets, last but not least, those pen sets from Arkham Bazaar. I'm going to drop that Lovecraft Easing prizes email address. Speaking of simplicity, Soren. So if you would like one of those, send an email to the main Lovecraft Easing email address. That's lovecrafteasing, E-Z-I-N-E, @gmail.com. In the subject, make sure you put the word prize so I can filter that over. And then just put the name of the prize in the subject if you want. And then whatever you want in the body of the email, probably some flattering words about Pete and Rick. And Pete and Rick, that should do it. Sorry, Matt. Thanks for listening, everybody, and we'll see you next week.